My experience is from the point of view of I learned through trial. My experience is from the point of view of I learned through trial and error how to manipulate people's emotions using music, because that was my job as a film composer, to support a story and the emotions that are required in a story to help tell that story effectively and to get the strongest emotional response.
Welcome to This Way Up. We are bringing you engaging, informative, and inspiring conversations surrounding all aspects of mental health from the perspective of us as parents and caregivers. I'm Andrea Nanigian.
And I'm Emmy Waters. When someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, this can be an incredibly stressful and challenging time. So we're here to provide valuable resources to support you as you navigate this journey.
Today's guest, Chris Boardman, will give you a lot to think about in terms of how music plays such an integral part in our emotions and moods and general, mental wellness and health.
Yeah. We love talking with Chris and how he's turned his lifelong career in music and creating music into a vehicle to help so many other people through this online course he's offering. And his ability to teach people how to use music as another tool to mitigate their own mental wellness is really wonderful. So have fun with this one. Here comes Chris.
Today, we are joined by Chris Boardman, a very talented individual in the film, TV, and recording industry. He has been nominated for several Academy and Emmy nominations and won several as well. He has been the director of the acclaimed Frost School of Music at the University of Miami, and he comes to talk to us today about a program that he is launching called The Missing Link. After developing PTSD from traumatic events, Chris dedicated his time and his talents to bring awareness and healing to trauma, PTSD, anxiety, and depression using music and his story. Welcome, Chris.
Hi. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Hey, Chris, what we would like to start with is you telling us a little bit about what the Missing Link Project is, and then what inspired you to use your talents in this direction.
Sure. The Missing Link is a combination of, it has two different parts. There is a concert that I wrote, directed, produced, scored for symphony orchestra with an accompanying film and 5 live actors. And the purpose of the concert is to provide a community engagement vehicle for local symphonies and schools to generate awareness and acceptance of trauma, as opposed to break down the stigma attached to mental illness. It should be noted that trauma is not a disease. Trauma is an injury. And it's mislabeled because people they're very uncomfortable, for the most part, discussing mental illness, probably because they're afraid of it because they don't know. The second part of the Missing Link Project is a online course that can also be taught as a workshop to educate people about the neurological and physiological responses to music, that the body responds involuntarily through the autonomic nervous system, so that you can listen with intent to use music as a tool to regulate your mental health. Like I say, it exists as an online course that you can do by yourself, or in some cases, we can do a workshop for groups of people. But that's what the Missing Link is. It is. How I came to be here or to develop this, I had what would politely be called a workplace bullying event. More specifically, I was the target of a narcissistic rage by my former boss. And it took me about the crazy thing about it is at the time, I felt physically threatened, and that to this day, I believe that if he had a weapon, I could be dead.
Wow.
That's how intense this experience was. Turned around, walked out of his office, never spoke to him again, had to work for him for another year. It wasn't until the following year that I realized that I had developed symptoms of PTSD. When I left that job, I was trying to figure out how did I want to spend my time. So what do I really want to do with myself? And I decided I would write something for the concert hall only because I had never done that before. I've done movies and television and records and live performance, but I'd never really focused my attention on the concert hall. So I was searching around for a theme to base this short little piece on. And I was struggling to say, what is this going to be about? Knowing full well that a random piece of music would probably not mean much to anybody. Maybe it's because of my film scoring background, where there has to be a purpose that I'm trying to serve in the work that I do. I was struggling to find a theme. And then there was a shooting at the Westlake Bar in Thousand Oaks, or Westlake Village, it's the Borderline Bar in Westlake, California. And this is November 17th, 2018. 13 people died and 16 people were injured.
Oh.
And I immediately realized that I could use my musical storytelling skills that I had honed through decades of accompanying and directing people's emotions using music and film. I could use those musical storytelling skills to bring awareness to people who suffer from trauma-related symptoms and illustrate their inner emotional lives that they don't talk about. Because one of the primary aspects of PTSD is that to describe it is to say that the hippocampus becomes confused and thinks that a memory in the past is occurring in the present moment. You may have heard these terms triggered before. Well, basically something will happen, some sort of sensory input will cause the brain to recall a memory. Benign memory is interpreted as being in the past. For a PTSD sufferer, if that stimulus triggers this traumatic event, the brain will get confused and think that that threat is happening in the present time. That is why people don't want to talk about PTSD. They don't want to talk about those symptoms for fear that their brain will trigger that traumatic event and make them believe that it's in the present day, in the present moment.
So therapy has got to be really hard for that then. I don't think I've ever really thought about that.
Well, yeah, it is difficult. It is helpful. EMDR therapy is helpful, but it's the kind of thing, it's like getting a scar on your skin. The scar never goes away. It just changes and becomes less noticeable, but the scar will always remain. PTSD sufferers will always have the propensity to be triggered given the relevance of the sensory data that they're receiving. So you can't necessarily just wash it away or get fixed. Like, I'm going to go fix my car. I'll repaint the outside, fix the dent and repaint the outside and I'll be good as new. That doesn't happen with people in PTSD. So the best that one can hope for is to learn how to manage and how to live with the injury that they've received from this traumatic event. So I started researching the neurology behind all of this and working on the music and going through it. And in this research, it's astonishing to me that 66 million people in America currently suffer from some sort of mental illness symptoms.
Yeah.
It's devastating, isn't it?
20% of Americans are suffering.
Yeah, I would imagine at least.
And that's just the people that are claiming.
Yeah, that reported, yeah.
Well, that's exactly right. There's a whole layer of people who don't know they're suffering, or if they are, they don't express it.
Yeah.
Going through this research and learning more about this, I was just devastated being a hands-on parent. I was a real hands-on dad, and I was always there, and I love children, and I love being a parent. And I take that role very seriously. 25% of all teenagers have had a major traumatic event, mental illness event in their lives.
Wow.
And hundreds of suicidal teens end up in the ER every night because they have no place else to go. Suicide is the second leading cause of death of teenagers behind gun violence. And so then you look at 98% of schools in America practice active shooter drills.
Right. It's horrible to think of.
And that is traumatic in and of itself.
Yeah.
So now we have a culture that's normalizing trauma and expecting people to not be affected by it. So when I got wind of all of this information, I realized that what the missing link needs to really do is provide a tool for teenagers and their parents to be able to self-manage their care.
Well, the thing is care is not even readily available. So if we can be ahead of it and teaching young people how to prevent themselves from getting further down the line so that they don't need the care that's not even there, we'll be ahead of the game.
Well, that's exactly the point.
Does the Missing Link course teach people how to create music, or is it providing music as therapy?
Basically, it teaches people to listen to a couple of things. Hopefully, it teaches people how to listen with intent.
Oh.
So it provides education in terms of, if I'm depressed and I want to get moving and I want to change the way I feel, then if you understand the principles behind how the body reacts to specific pieces of music, then you have the power, the ability to be able to say, well, if I listen to this music, then it can be used as a tool to regulate my mood. On the other end of the spectrum is, if you're anxious, if this is a crazy thing about the brain, is if you're anxious and you listen to a slow piece of music, you can actually regulate your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your respiration, strictly by listening to a piece of music that is meaningful to you, that triggers a positive memory, that will act in that function of slowing your heart rate. There's a term called entrainment, which I learned, which is a phenomenon where two bodies vibrating at different speeds will attempt to match the tempo. Now, in the inside of the brain, there's only 20 watts of energy in the brain. So in the billions of neurons that are in your brain, the brain's only function is to stay alive, right? To keep the body alive.
Right.
Right. So what the brain does is, if brain waves are going a mile a minute and you're listening to a slow piece of music, a couple of things will happen. Number one, your brain will try to conserve energy by matching the tempo of the piece of music that you're listening to.
Oh, really? That's so interesting.
Yeah. It's only recently that there's science that proves this. This is something I've known anecdotally for years. But the other thing about this is, there's brain waves in different brain wave states. Your brain reacts differently. If you're anxious, your brain waves are going to be faster. So it's 7 minutes is the minimum. If you listen to a slow piece of music for 7 minutes, that's approaching the human heart rate at rest, 60 beats per minute, it will not only change your hormonal response to anxiety, it will also slow your brain waves.
Wow.
And if you reduce your brain waves to an alpha state, which is relaxation.
My husband's mother, my husband came from Massachusetts, and they moved to California. They drove from Massachusetts to California with 3 kids and I think 2 dogs. One dog was kind of neurotic and just crazy, in a nice term, not in a mental health state term. She turned on classical music for the entire drive from Massachusetts to California.
Good for her.
Wow.
To lower the dog's anxiety level.
Yeah, you bet.
Oh, the dog.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we do know this stuff.
Dogs have an emotional life too.
They do.
And the thing about music, we've always known this about music. It's part and parcel to the healthcare system, in that if it's not repeatable in a scientific sense, then it becomes anecdotal as opposed to provable in a scientific context.
Right.
Well, now there are studies that are supporting this in bits and pieces. And when I say anecdotal, my experience is from the point of view of, I learned through trial and error how to manipulate people's emotions using music, because that was my job as a film composer, to support a story and the emotions that are required in a story to help tell that story effectively and to get the strongest emotional response. To me, the great thing about this is it's not language driven.
Mm-hmm.
The psychologists and even psychiatrists tend to use language as a basis for communication.
So I heard an interview with John Williams and Steven Spielberg several years ago. And apparently Steven Spielberg had asked him to write the theme song for Jaws.
Right.
And they were sitting there and he was gone for a couple of days or whatever. And he brings Steven Spielberg over and he says, okay, I got it. And he goes, dun, 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 dun. And Steven Spielberg says, that's it? That's all that's there?
Yeah.
And he says, I think that's all you need. And I'm like, absolutely. I am terrified today to go into a pool at night with nobody around in fear that, a big great white's going to come out.
Well, in the film world, music becomes a character.
Yeah.
And that's a great example of music becoming a character because, there are spots in that movie where you hear the music and you know that the shark is near, even though you don't see the shark.
Right.
So that's the power of music to communicate without needing language or visuals to be able to augment or be supportive.
Yeah. That's the perfect example of how music can elicit an anxiety response, stress.
Right.
Or all those theme songs from all those horror movies,
Yeah, well, this is what directors do. This is part of their skill set is to know how to pull those strings to get people to respond.
Curating these valuable conversations is really about our shared passion for promoting mental wellness. Behind the scenes, however, there are some platforms and systems we utilize that cost money that help bring these episodes to you.
If you found value in our conversations and feel inspired to support, consider making a donation. Whether it's the price of your morning cup of coffee or more, your contribution directly supports our ability to keep connecting, sharing, and growing. Please visit our website at thiswayuppodcast.com to support this community. We thank you and we appreciate you.
Chris, I think it's a great avenue for you to use your how many decades of experience in eliciting emotions to now bringing that to a tool that people can use to help regulate themselves.
He's using his powers for good.
He is.
When I was deliberating doing this, I realized that, I really don't need another notch on the gun. I've accomplished a lot in my life. I was more interested in not necessarily creating a legacy, but having an impact.
Yeah. And
that the impact was more important. And I have to tell you, if I didn't personally suffer from PTSD, I think I would have given this up a long time ago.
It gave you a purpose. Yeah.
Because it put it this way, being in touch with that, knowing how I respond and what my issues are, reminds me of all the people out there who are suffering, who have no idea. And it's not just the individual. There's now evidence that trauma is transmitted generationally. The emotional impact of the Holocaust is transmitted to subsequent generations.
Yeah.
And so I just look at this and think, one of the things we talked briefly before we started about my grandkids, the thing that I'm just astonished by and grateful for, my grandkids are happy. They are joyful. They are loving their life. And I just couldn't sit by knowing that I had something that I could do, that I was capable of, or at least I thought I was capable of, to leave a world that they would inherit that would match the joy that they felt in their lives at this age. There's one other thing about the missing link that needs to be mentioned. And this is from a cultural anthropological point of view, is part of the reason that in my opinion, that we are having such difficulties, feels like the wheels are coming off our societies. We've forgotten how to listen to people.
Yes.
We're not necessarily connected with that person. We are just mindlessly listening. Oh, I can say this. And so the concert portion of the missing link is I'm attempting to create an event that promotes human connection for local communities. So that people, this is a crazy thing that I've learned about me. You ever wonder why the music is a huge part of any religious service, at least Christian service,
Why?
is because when you are receiving this music, you're hearing this music, and you're engaging with this music, you will be vibrating at a specific frequency. Your body will respond to the frequency that is listening to. And then you put everybody in the room is vibrating at the same frequency. Now you have a communal event where you feel connected to the other person. This is why people love to go to rock concerts.
Yeah.
Because they're feeling that energy transmit between all the other individuals, which becomes a much more positive, much more impactful experience.
So is that what your concerts are based on, is a group experience of a common energy level?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the subject matter is trauma, but it's about getting people in the same room and hopefully saying that it's okay, number one, to feel traumatized or to have those feelings, but also that the person next to you may have a similar experience and you need not be afraid of that person sitting next to you.
Yeah, creating community.
My dream, my ultimate goal would be that this concept of saying, taking 5 minutes before every class begins and listening to a piece of music would be incorporated in the curriculum as a way of heightening class participation and productivity.
Yeah.
By removing the distractions. Interestingly enough, we have a young friend who's 27. He grew up in Taiwan. And he told me that in Taiwan, when you're a kid, after lunch, they play this song. And the song is, whenever they hear that song, they're supposed to brush their teeth. As a way of getting to condition people to actually brush their teeth.
Yeah, creating that association.
And he says, to this day, I hear this song and it makes me want to brush my teeth.
Yeah.
So it's Pavlovian in a cynical point of view, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think is interesting about music in general. I mean, on one hand, the things you're saying are scientific, quantifiable. You can repeat it, get the same response,
Sure.
kind of like what you're saying. So there's that. We certainly know so much more about brainwaves and how music affects that. But there's also an undeniable part of music that's just kind of, we've said this before too, we have an association with it and it elicits a good memory because like Andrea and I, maybe if we're having a crappy day, we're going to turn around and blast some 80s music or, whatever it is.
Sure.
So there's that too. That's equally as valid. So along those lines, I'm thinking when I was a kid and I was in my friend's parents' car and they only listened to classical, I hated it. It was so uncomfortable. It would, it made me, I wasn't calm. I think I was probably agitated. How would you explain that when a kid just doesn't have the palate for it at the time?
It's because I could only assume that it's a novel experience that you have no relationship to.
Yeah.
And so it was hard for you to understand how that music would be relevant to you and your experience.
That's true. I wasn't listening to it for a purpose. I just wasn't entertained. And so I would have rather listened to something else.
Well, so your mindset is saying, I only listen to music to be entertained.
True.
Right. So that's your filter. I learned something about today, something called RAS, called the reticular activating system. And it's part of the brain that decides what do you pay attention to and what do you ignore. Right.
Yeah. I've heard of that.
This is an example of a conditioned response to a piece of music. And in this case, chances are you probably had no relationship to the music at all. It didn't mean anything to you. So that's a huge problem, especially as it relates to classical music.
Mm-hmm. I think you alluded to this a little earlier when you were talking about the online portion, I believe. And we're talking about being able to relate to a piece of music. In the Missing Link online course that you've developed, do you have music that is specific for the course, or are you asking the participants to pick from their own songs to help bring them to a place?
That's a great question. It's designed to teach a method. It's not designed to use a specific piece of music. Using a specific piece of music that you may or may not have any personal relevance to is like going to the doctor saying, take this pill, you'll feel better. And invariably, there can be layers of resistance to taking the pill or believing or trusting the doctor, any number of things that can make you not want to or impede your ability to say, I'm going to do this. So to that extent, once I got my arms around what are the parameters that will generate this kind of outcome, I realized that it's all about tempo. It has nothing to do with musical genre whatsoever.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm.
So with that realization, I realized each user could personalize the music that is relevant to them as long as they understood what specific music to choose in relationship to tempo.
Because it's the tempo which your brain uses to regulate your physiology.
Correct.
Okay.
So this is the online course in itself has each exercise has three different factors. One is music, another is breath, and then movement. And these are all designed to create alternative sensory data to the brain to counteract the fight-flight response. And combining these three elements into an exercise that you get to create, that you get to choose a kind of music, that you can practice on your own or in a group. My dream is that it becomes a tool that will reduce people from sliding down that rabbit hole of depression and anxiety without having any real avenue to relief.
Yeah. What would be an example of movement that somebody listening to this podcast could implement with their child? Let's just say we have a teenager with ruminating thoughts, intrusive thoughts, a lot of anxiety. What would be an example of movement that they could implement that would mitigate that, that's repeatable?
It can be anything. It could be something as simple as doing this.
That's not simple.
He's patting his head and rubbing his tummy, everybody.
Well, the movement itself doesn't really matter. What's important is that it's replicatable.
So you're encouraging somebody to channel focus into something tangible, a movement.
Correct.
So it's switching focus. I have a question about the point you both were making about the tempo, that it comes down to the tempo, if it's going to be excitatory or more relaxing. What would you say about people who claim that, when I was younger, it was like this headbanger kind of music was calming for them? How would you explain that in terms of tempo?
Every situation is different.
Uh-huh.
Are you talking about listening to it individually or in a group?
I guess individually. I'm just thinking about my kids. I know one of my kids might gravitate towards something very calm if they need to be calm or study. And I have another child that's more likely listening to something really loud, fast tempo, claiming that's calming for studying. So is it individual or?
In my opinion, because I use both, for me, it is the rhythm of it. So a lot of times, even if I listen to, Metallica, it's just that repetitive rhythm that I just get into the tempo. And then that gives my mind something to focus on.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
And that can calm me.
Yeah.
I know, like, even if I, when I was like training for half marathons and such, sometimes I would listen to the Nutcracker while I was training for the half marathon, and people would be like, well, how could you listen to that?
Exactly.
But it wasn't that.
Yep.
It was just that I was focused on the tempo.
Yeah.
That's a great point. It's the focus is the important part of it.
Yeah.
It's changing the way your brain is functioning at that moment. In terms of tempo, so if you listen to a piece of dance music, it's the tempo that's going to make you want to move, as opposed to a slow piece of music, right?
Right.
And I would have to, searching for an answer, I have to think that focus that you're talking about, Andrea, is associated with a memory of a previous experience that will change your brain chemistry at the same time. It's a combination of all this stuff. I don't want to sound like a know-it-all or like I'm a neurologist by any stretch of the imagination. But, I have done a lot of research about this. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, my opinion is, if you understand the basic building blocks of the process, then it's trial and error for everyone.
Yeah, because it is kind of individual.
It is very individual because no two people's experience is identical.
Yeah.
So like I say, that's what I'm trying to do, is to educate people as to how to use music in a different context in a way that makes sense to them.
And it's no secret. Music elicits emotion.
Yeah.
Music, for most people, music is an important part of their life in some form or fashion. So using it as a tool in your tool belt for mental health and for you teaching your kids how to use it to help them is an excellent place to go because it's something that's readily available, it's common, and it's very personal.
Yeah. If Andrew and I wanted to check out the course, how would we find it and what does it cost?
At the moment, I'm doing a free beta, and you go to the missinglink.mykajabi.com, and there is an opt-in page. So you have to opt in via email. You can also go to chrisboardmancourses.com, and there you can find a link there. Or on my Facebook page or LinkedIn.
This was a great conversation.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's my motto. My motto is more music, feel better.
Yeah, it's perfect.
There we go. More music, feel better. I love it.
We'll put that on the t-shirt. Thank you so much, Chris.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for letting me share my stories. I've got more than a few.
I love it.
Thank you for tuning in to today's conversation. To join our community and access more valuable resources, please visit our website at thiswayuppodcast.com.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this with a friend. And to stay connected, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Listen to This Way Up.